Okay. And I'm the cropland weed extension specialist, but the next speaker, Zach Miller, over there, he's passing around, he's going to pass around some surveys that I will really appreciate if you can fill them out. It's going to take you 10 minutes, 15 minutes the most to fill them out. And the reason we are passing out these surveys is because many times we don't just want to come here and give you information. We need to know what's the perceptions and prior knowledge on certain issues, and this is particularly related to climate change and its potential impact on Montana agriculture. There's a lot of discussions around, and we didn't want to just come and say this is the way it is. We want to hear from our audience, basically. Okay? There's around, I think, 20-something questions. Most of them are multiple choice. Sometimes you have to write a few words on them. But the most important thing, this is absolutely anonymous. I should not know who filled this. Do not put your name, okay? Because we have to. Sorry?
Except in the yellow.
Except in the yellow little piece of paper. Write your name here, then take it out, and you will see there's two containers, Tupperwares in the back. The big one is for the survey, the yellow one is for the name. So once you finish filling it, we'll draw some prizes. Third prize is going to be the MSU official extension coffee mug. Second prize is going to be the travel mug. And the first prize is going to be the MSU vest. So I think we have 3 prizes for around 35, so 1 in the 10 chances of getting a prize. Not bad. And again, don't write your name except in the yellow envelope. Then put the little yellow piece of paper in the small container. The survey is going to be the large one. There are some questions. If you don't feel comfortable in answering any question, just skip it. Okay? It's being prepared by a group of sociologists and with our input as well in terms of the management. But again, if you want to fill everything, fantastic. If you don't feel you want to fill, there's a few questions you want to skip, no problem. So what I will suggest is that I start my presentation now, and then we take kind of a 10 minutes break, and during those 10 minutes break we fill it, and after the break, before Zach starts, we draw the prizes. Okay? So, with that, terminating cover crops with sheep. And the idea is, can we do it in order to reduce tillage as well as chemical inputs? And a large percentage of Montana farmlands look like this. Yes, I left a copy of my presentation in the back. Are you passing around? Thank you. And if you have any questions, if you want to slow me down or repeat anything, wait anytime. Okay, don't wait for me to say any questions. But this is, I think, a typical photo of Montana, where we have one crop every other year. Plain explain the reason why, preserving moisture. So we have these acres and acres of wheat in fallow. And in order to reduce problems of soil erosion and preserve soil moisture, most of the acres are going into non-till, which is great. There are some benefits of non-till in terms of soil and soil water retention. There's also a reduction in erosion. We increase the soil structure, as well as we improve the microbial biomass. However, for every potential benefits, there's also some drawbacks. And as a weed scientist, I think that the drawback of the non-till systems is that they're heavily dependent on herbicides, which are pretty effective. But when I came to Montana in 2004, at that time we have 4 species which were resistant to different herbicides. Nowadays, we have already 7 species. Okay, so the number of cases of resisting weeds to different herbicides is increasing. Almost every other year, we have a new case. When I came here in Montana, at that time it was kochia, Russian thistle, wild oat, and Persian darnel. A few years later, green foxtail was also found resistance. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago we confirmed cheatgrass to be resistant to the ALS inhibitor herbicides, Osprey, Everest, that family of herbicides. And I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago we confirmed a couple of biotypes in northeast Montana of Marstail, not very common here, but common over there, which is resistant to glyphosate. This is Roundup. So now we have in Montana 2 species which have been confirmed resistant to Roundup glyphosate, which is kochia and Marstail. Some of the biotypes of kochia have multiple herbicide resistance. This is, you can control them with different families of herbicides. In this case, we have the family of the glyphosate as well as the Everest or Olympus families you can kill at the same time using any one of those herbicides. Wild oat, we have some biotypes where we can control them using 4 families of herbicides. We test them already with 12 different herbicides. So basically, there are almost no options for those biotypes. Luckily, they are very contained. But what I'm trying to say here is that I think my most common presentation is my herbicide-resistant talk. I go around Montana doing all these cases, how we are getting every year new cases of herbicide resistance. So that's a major drawback of this increased reliance on herbicides. And whenever you want me to come back and talk about herbicide resistance, it's entitled. So there are alternatives, and one alternative will be, instead of having the fallow year, put a cover crop. And the question is, then how do we terminate a cover crop? Now, Klein already went through the benefits of the cover crops. I'm not going to go into much detail there in terms of nutrient cycling, improve water infiltration, reduce erosion, some biological control, not just for wisdom sulfite, but also for weed control. But every time we have some benefits, I like to also think in the potential drawbacks. And the drawback here is that it's expensive to use a cover crop. There are some establishment costs, some maintenance costs. That year, the farmer who's planting the cover crop does not see a direct source of revenues. And there are some costs in terms of terminating it. So how do we exactly terminate a cover crop? Well, one possibility, as Klein was mentioning, will be to use herbicides. And I already went through the problems of that approach. Every time we use herbicides, we increase the selective pressure. And when we increase the selective pressure, what happens? We have herbicide resistance. Okay, so we are getting more and more problems. Another option will be to do it mechanically, like Ken was also showing. And this is a photo I took in Big Sandy, where they're terminating mechanically a cover crop. The problem is that in the triangle area, if you terminate a cover crop, and then you have, say, 5-6 weeks with no rainfall, and temperatures in the 90 degrees, and gusty winds, this is what you will looking, but the problem is that you will be having problems of soil erosion. So again, some benefits, some potential drawbacks. Another alternative would be to try to use animals to graze those cover crops. And we're currently working with sheep, and the idea of using sheep is simple. Basically, we have around 250,000 sheep in Montana. They need forage. Cover crops and weeds can represent a good source of forage. So we are not proposing farmers to become ranchers or ranchers to become farmers. Sometimes that idea doesn't really fly. But we say we may be able to establish some sort of entrepreneurial relationship where, you know, I bring my sheep to terminate your cover crop, you're also feeding my sheep, so there will be some financial arrangement that needs to be done there. So, can we terminate the cover crop using some strategic grazing with sheep? That's the first question we asked several years ago. So we contact a local grower. We said, can we bring our temporary fences and the sheep? And they said, yeah, sure. We put the sheep there. And a week later, this is what we saw. So the answer is pretty simple. Yes, we can terminate the cover crop with sheep. But, you know, every time I see something so drastic, I need to start scratching my head and say, well, true, but are there any biological, environmental, or economic implications of this approach, right? Because I mentioned the potential benefits and drawbacks of both chemical-based approaches or tillage, mechanically based approaches, so there could be some drawbacks here. And the reason I think there could be some drawbacks here is, I like this quote. It basically says that for every complex problem, there is an answer that's going to be clear, simple, and wrong. So we didn't want to provide a simple answer and say, yeah, this is fantastic, it's the next silver bullet, but creating more problems. So we've been addressing that question, so what is the potential environmental, economic, and biological impacts of this sheep grazing, working in different systems, ranging from some horticultural systems to some experimental plots we have at MSU, basically a small cereal legume rotation, up to some farmers' farms. Now today, because we don't have a lot of time, I will be talking mostly on the study we did in some horticultural systems. The results are very similar so far, and mainly because this is a study that we finished, and we are still working on the other two studies. But the trends are very similar. Okay, so I will be referring to some of the things you're observing, the small grain, the lessons appear to be very similar. So questions? Questions so far? Okay, so we conducted this study for 2 years at the Town Harvest Garden, which is kind of a funny situation because it's a commercial farm, but it's owned by MSU, and that's where students do their internships. But it's basically a 2.5 acres farm. The average yield of 4 years is around 25,000 pounds per year. It's a USDA certified, and basically it sells the output in local markets as a CSA. And this is managed by a farmer, the farm manager. We didn't want to modify the management systems. We just wanted to add a little bit of an experiment here. So what he does is he divides his farm in 6 areas, and one of those 6 areas has a cover crop. And then the other 5 areas goes into production. And then he basically rotates the cover crops every year. So one area one area will receive a cover crop every 6 years. Okay? And the cover crop, what he uses is it's a cocktail of basically buckwheat, beet, sweet clover, and peas. What he does is he mows that cover crop at the peak of biomass, right, almost at flowering, or when flowering is occurring, and then early next spring he incorporates everything with the spader. So we say, well, let's compare his approach to bringing sheep. So basically we divided one of those cover crop areas, and 3 plots were grazed and 3 plots were mowed as regularly he does. And we basically used this as an excuse to take almost any measurements we could imagine. So we took soil nutrient contents and soil compaction and temperature and moisture. We also measured the above ground biomass and divided them by cover crops and weeds, and also we checked for the presence of weeds before and after we grazed those cover crops. But also wanted to see a little bit more in terms of the environmental health of the whole system, and we decided to work with the ground beetles. And the idea that we use ground beetles is because they are what's called indicator taxa. They are very sensitive to environmental changes or management changes in the management. They are also very important ecologically in your farms because they are generally predators of many insect pests. They also eat lots of weed seeds, as well as they are prey for many birds. So, they're important insects within a farm. So we have these 6 areas, 3 mowed, 3 grazed, and then what we ask Chas is the following year, after we finish mowing or grazing, if he could go there and plant 3 different crops, kohlrabi, lettuce, and spinach across the whole area, so we could see the legacy effect these management practices. And so we did it 2 years. 2 years we grazed, and then we came back the next year, the following year, and see the subsequent impact of grazing and mowing. In terms of the ground beetles, weeds, and yields. So you can see here we are measuring, weed biomass and yields, and I like to think this is a good photo of what the future is going to be looking like. We have these young students, so basically 3 of them are working very hard, but one of them is texting. So 25% of the yield is wasted. And I didn't know I was paying all of them. So anyways, so we went there, put these temporary fences. They are not expensive, relatively easy to establish. They are hot wire. One other thing we needed to do is bring some water for the sheep. So they stay there for around 5 or 6 days. We brought the sheep, and we noticed that basically half an hour or 1 hour after we started our experiment, we definitely were making big changes because this is the area where Chas has just mowed, and we just put our sheep in here. So we are definitely making a change, right? It will take the sheep around a week or so to terminate a cover crop. Question here is, are we seeing any differential impact by changing this management practice? So these graphs are a little bit busy, but basically it's showing soil temperature and soil moisture, no difference whatsoever. In terms of the soil compaction, after we terminated the cover crops, the following year, again, no difference between the previously grazed and previously mowed areas. Both years we obtained the same results. And in terms of the weeds and weed pressure, you can see what happened, the results in here. Basically, sheep, I like to describe it as children who, when you offer them the food, they go first for the French fries, then they go for the burger, and then they look at the veggies and say, I'm not touching them, right? So sheep are exactly the same. You can see there they were not touching a red-root pigweed. They did not eat red-root pigweed, but very interestingly, we also saw red-root pigweed in the areas where we mowed. What happened is that after we mowed those areas, red-root pigweed resprouted. So I think it's very interesting that with totally different management practices, a biological practice, which is grazing, or a mechanical practice, which is mowing, we end having the same species. One of them were red-root pigweed because of unpalatability, in the case of grazing, or pre-sprouting in the case of mowing. And the other species which was very abundant was common mallow. And the reason is that when you mow them, you don't touch common mallow, it's so prostrated. And sheep also don't like to eat prostrated species. So we end having the same wheat communities after we graze or mow, but through totally different mechanisms. I thought it was pretty interesting that. When we look at the ground beetles, basically this is the abundance of ground beetles across the summer. In the graze area is the red and the blue is the mow. No differences, no difference in the number of the species that were there. So this is kind of the diversity of species we found. Exactly the same, different practices, but the same kind of filters in terms of what communities we see. So now we also did a little bit of a back of the envelope calculation, and based on the quality of that forage, if Chas has sold a grazing lease, he would have got around $10 to $18 per acre, which is not a lot for a vegetable farm, but you know, instead of getting nothing and also having to mow them, you know, you're getting a little bit of a returns instead. Now, the question was, what happened the following year? Right? Are we actually compromising the wheat pressures? Are we compromising the yields? And when we look at the wheat pressure, this is the three crops we have: kohlrabi, lettuce, and spinach. This is the wheat biomass in the grays in red, and mow is the grays. Basically, there's no differences. And when we look at the yields, both years we also saw the same yields. In 2013, we lost our spinach crop. But basically what we are seeing is that we did not have any differential impact the year we use the sheep or the following year. And my student was kind of disappointed because he wanted to see benefits and said, well, not having a negative impact is also a pretty good result, right? So in summary, what we're seeing is that in these horticultural systems, grazing can be used to replace the mowing and then spading. If you have a good forage, like Chas was having, you can gain around $10 to $18 per acre. We are seeing similar results when we use a cover crop in our small grain systems. Again, the forage quality can be sold as grazing leasing around $12 to $15 in those cases. We didn't see any biological or environmental impact in terms of the wheat pressure or soil quality or soil compaction. We didn't see any impact on yields. In our small grain systems, we are seeing somehow the same results, but we have a few issues where in some cases got a little bit weedy and actually yields got compromised. But most importantly, unfortunately, it is not the silver bullet for weed control. We are seeing the same weed communities, but we're still seeing some weeds present there. In a small grain system, we're concerned about perennial weeds such as dandelion, and in our case, Canada thistle, because we're seeing that sheep don't really touch them. So I know some people would love to have their sheep and graze their weeds and get rid of them. You can do it for many species, but not for some of them. So it's not a silver bullet. And with that, questions? Yeah.
How did you know how many animals put in a certain
Sorry, what?
area? How did you know how many animals put in a certain area?
Okay, so how many animals we put? That's a really good question. I'm the weed type of person. Pat Hatfield is the sheep guy. I will give you his answer, okay? And basically what he says is that it is the same to use 4 sheep for 10 days or 40 sheep for 4 days, right? I mean, he's seeing the same issue, and so it's a question of how many animals you have and how much in a rush are you, okay? In this case, for our plots, which were not that big, were like, I'm thinking in meters right now, 10 by 18 meters, so 30 feet by 40, something like that, 50. We were using 5 animals for 5 to 6 days. And the key issue was basically, you can always, like I said with that quote that you can, every solution can be actually wrong, you can overgraze and you can have problems of compaction. So the rule of thumb is to remove the animals when there's around 10% of the biomass still left there. So that's what I have to response. Okay. Questions?
You actually answered. When you said you were leaving 10%, I was going to ask you, how did you know when you were done? But you just answered that.
By basically not overgrazing.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, so can we do a break?
Yeah, we'll take a 10-minute break. There's coffee and tea back there.
But
And then
not a break. You have to do this. Please, I mean, take a break, go and get some coffee. But I would really appreciate if you feel that survey. Then remember, take the yellow paper, put in the small cup, the survey in the large one, and then we'll put it up. Thank you. No, believe me, she was not. Uh-huh.